All right, hello and welcome back to the 10-Step Mix. I'm Al from musicguydepodcast.com, and we're on step 3 here with my song Waiting on the Right Time, available on Spotify right now. Step 3, which is mix bus processing. So I'm going to move my stupid face out of the way here, and we're going to check out this track in my template here called Mix Bus. Normally I would have this set to 0, but because of the way that we're recording this video here, I need to have it a bunch quieter so that it doesn't come in too loud. This mix bus track is where all the audio in my session ends up. We can see that every track, with the exception of our VCAs, is sending to our mix bus, mix B as it's been shortened in our mix window view here. So all of that information is ending up in our mix bus. So what that allows us to do is get a lot of heavy lifting done with just a couple of small moves on a couple of plugins, because we're able to process all of the audio at the same time. So because it's all flowing into this green channel here, any move we make on any of these plugins is affecting our whole mix. So what we're going to try to do is bring a little bit of vibe to the mix, add a little bit of cohesiveness with some compression, a little bit more energy and punch and excitement, and add a little bit of level to it as well, so that it's nice and loud for our client, and they don't go, why isn't it as loud as everything else I'm listening to on iTunes? So that's what we're doing here. So we'll start by just bringing in this EQ plugin, which is the basic plugin that comes with Pro Tools. And all I'm doing here is rolling off 40 hertz and below, which is super, super low stuff, and 20 kilohertz and above, which is super, super high stuff. So these are frequencies that, as human beings, not all of us can even hear. And 40 hertz and below, you might feel in a dance club or at a stadium or something with giant speakers. So if this was an EDM track, we may not want to roll off this 40 hertz. But for this rock track, I guess kind of like a pop rock song, 40 and below doesn't even really exist as a sound in this session. The only thing that might be producing 40 hertz is some kind of super sub rumbly weird frequency from maybe a microphone getting knocked, or somebody stepping on it, or stepping on the microphone stand rather, or some super low subs from the kick that we don't even want. So we're going to make sure that those aren't coming through, and it's also opening up a little bit of extra digital headroom for us since we are working in the box. So if we engage this and disengage it, we shouldn't hear any difference at all. So it's not even doing anything at all. So just a good one to have in there. It's also a nice fail-safe in case there is some crazy low rumble thing happening, and then you get into your car and the doors start shaking, So it's just a good little fail-safe to have. So the next plugin we're going to use is the SSL bus compressor from Waves. We've got it on a very slow attack of 10 milliseconds, very low ratio, very fast release. So it's not going to be doing a ton. And as you can see, it's the threshold's all the way up. We don't want to hit the audio too hard, so we'll see it's just touching the compressor here. We're looking for movement between 0 and 4 here. So you can see it's just tucking in the snare a little bit. It's adding a little bit of that analog flavor to the track. It's adding a little bit of extra thump and thickness to the kick and the bass, and just sort of bringing all the elements together and making them sound a little bit more cohesive. So we could actually hit this a little bit harder if we wanted to. And if we wanted to do that, we can use this handy master fader here that's part of the template. And what this master fader does is, because it's set to mix bus, it's controlling the level of all the audio that's going into our mix bus track. So it's like a little pre-fader to our mix bus. So it's a really nice tool to have, because when I'm mixing, if things are getting too loud and too out of control, I can pull it back with the master, and that will decrease the amount of level going into our mix bus, but it won't disrupt the balance of the mix that I've been working on. And conversely, if I want to hit my mix bus a little bit harder, I can, rather than turning up every track in my mix, I can just sort of turn up the overall level of my mix going into my mix bus by using my master fader. So if we open up this compressor again and hit play, start turning up our master fader, watch this needle here on this compressor. So now it's getting hit quite a bit harder. And our track is quite a bit louder because I've turned it up pretty significantly. But I'm seeing that there's some clip warning lights here, which we don't like to see. So I'm going to bring that back. I had it at 9 before. I think I'm just going to bring it up to 8. So I'm holding control so I can make a fine fader movement here. You can see we're getting a little bit of a warning light here. Not too bad though. So we'll leave it at 8 for now. And that's what our compressor's doing. The next plugin we're using is the Oxford Inflator. And I like to start with it around 30%. So I'm going to enter 30 here. And what this plugin does is, I feel like it just sort of lifts the blanket off of the mix. It just makes it sound a little bit more exciting in the high end and adds a little bit more energy to it. Not really sure how this plugin works, but it sounds pretty good. So here's what it's going to do. If we'll start with it bypassed. We'll bring it in. So again, a subtle effect, but it's sort of adding some extra energy and brightness to the top end of the mix. So love to have that one in there. Normally I'd use an L3 at the end of the chain as my limiter, but for this video, the way that we're recording, it puts a pretty significant delay on my talkback mic. So instead, I'm going to use the L1, which does essentially the same thing. We'll usually start with it at -2 threshold and 0.1 out ceiling. So the way a limiter works, you can think of it a little bit like a water system or like a pipe system. So as I push this threshold down, it pushes the audio up towards this volume ceiling, which it cannot pass. So as it gets pushed up towards this volume ceiling, it starts to get attenuated down in the attenuation over here. And this is going to allow us to add some loudness to our mix, but also not allow it to go beyond the maximum volume that Pro Tools can handle, where you're going to start to see your clip lights come on and start to hear some distortion. So let's see what it's doing. So all we want to do is just catch the loudest peaks of the material, as you can see it's doing here. It's the odd snare drum hit. Now, if I start to push this threshold down, you'll really hear it start to grab a lot more than just the loudest peaks and start to sort of alter the sound of our mix, and maybe not the best way, but let's see what it does. So now we can hear the mix is a lot louder, but the snare is starting to sound weird, and there might be a little bit of distortion happening. So we want to be fairly transparent with our limiting. So I'm going to put it back to where it was at -2. All right, so now we can listen to the mix without the mix bus on, and then I'll put it in. So we're just adding a little bit extra juice and loudness and cohesiveness and vibe to our mix there with the mix bus. So we'll come back for the next video where we'll be working on the vocals. So we'll see you there.